In the cold, unyielding void of deep space, humanity's reach extended far beyond what anyone had once imagined. Earth was now a myth, whispered about by those lucky enough to remember its blue skies and warm oceans. But for Maya, there was no nostalgia for a home she had never known. She was born in the barracks of the mining colonies, bred to survive, not to dream. Survival was etched into her bones, a constant battle against hunger, exhaustion, and despair. Maya was 22 when they came for her. Tall, shadow-cloaked figures with silver eyes and skin that shimmered like black glass descended on the colony. She and hundreds of others were rounded up, herded like cattle into towering biomechanical ships. The air in the vessel reeked of antiseptic and fear. No one spoke, not even the children. Silence was safer than the wrong question. The alien captors, known as the Zralek, were infamous. Stories painted them as collectors of death, hunters who sought prey for their cruel, ritualistic games. The whispers had always seemed like nightmares made real, a tale told to keep rebellious miners in line. Maya learned the truth when the Zralek forced her to watch the arena, a massive dome pulsating with an eerie, bioluminescent light, filled with an array of nightmarish predators from across the galaxy. She saw creatures eviscerated, shredded into unrecognizable masses of flesh. The prey? They were humans, her people. Maya sat in her cell, knees drawn to her chest, trying not to shiver in the frigid air. The cell was stark, its walls pulsating faintly as though alive. The floor beneath her was slick, organic, and thrummed softly beneath her bare feet. Her hair hung in dirty, knotted strands around her face, and her once toughened hands now trembled with weakness. She hadn't eaten in days. Hunger gnawed at her insides, but it was the least of her worries. The Zralek's arena was a death sentence, yet her heart refused to submit. Survival was not just a lesson she'd learned in the mines. It was her essence. Even here, as prey, there was something defiant within her that refused to be extinguished. "Do you think they'll let us fight back?" a voice asked from the shadows of the cell adjacent to hers. It was male, rough-edged but not entirely hopeless. What difference would it make? Maya replied without turning her head. Her voice was flat, a shield against the vulnerability threatening to consume her. "A big one. We die anyway, but we can't make it easy for them." "What's your name?" "Maya." "Nico," the man said. "You a fighter, Maya?" She laughed bitterly, the sound hollow. "Does it matter?" Nico didn't respond immediately, and when he did, his tone was softer. "It matters to me." The truth was Maya didn't know what she was. A fighter? A survivor? Or just a girl who had clawed her way through life, too stubborn to die quietly? She didn't know if she had the strength to face what lay ahead, but she knew she couldn't afford to give in to despair. She forced herself to meet Nico's gaze through the dim, bioluminescent glow of the cell walls. He looked just as worn and beaten as she felt, but his eyes carried something hers didn't: belief. It wasn't hope. Hope was dangerous here, but belief in a fight worth having. The cell doors opened with a sharp hiss, and two Zralek guards stepped inside, their angular frames and fluid movements more insect-like than humanoid. Maya's stomach twisted as they gestured for her to stand. She did so slowly, her muscles tight with tension. Nico was also dragged from his cell, his jaw set in defiance. Together, they were herded down a labyrinth of corridors, the walls glowing faintly, alive with some alien rhythm. The air was dense, heavy with a metallic tang. As they emerged into the arena's holding chamber, The reality of their situation hit Maya like a physical blow. The chamber's walls were lined with weapons, primitive, cruel instruments that seemed almost laughable against the high-tech backdrop of the Zralek. Blades, clubs, spears. No firearms, no armor. Just tools of desperation. The Zralek didn't need to arm their prey. It was a mockery, a final insult before the slaughter. Choose. One of the guards hissed in a voice like grinding stone. Maya's eyes flicked to Nico. He nodded grimly and stepped forward, selecting a blade no longer than his forearm. Maya hesitated, her gaze sweeping over the selection. She reached for a spear, the wood rough against her palms. The arena loomed ahead, a vast dome with a ceiling that seemed to stretch into infinity. Its bioluminescent glow was brighter here, casting an unearthly light over the sands below. The air was alive with a low, pulsating hum, and Maya realized it wasn't just the walls. The crowd, the alien audience beyond the dome, was chanting. They were tossed into the center of the arena, the massive gates slamming shut behind them. The crowd's chants grew louder, reverberating in Maya's chest. She felt Nico's presence at her side, his breathing steady despite the chaos around them. In the distance, the opposing gates creaked open, and Maya's heart plummeted. Something massive stirred in the shadows. "Stay close," Nico muttered. Maya tightened her grip on the spear, the rough wood biting into her hands. Her heart thundered in her chest, but she squared her shoulders, forcing her fear into the background. Whatever came next, she wouldn't make it easy for them. She refused to die on her knees. And so, the poor human girl became the prey. The first roar split the air like a crack of thunder. It was deep, guttural, and resonated through the arena like the primal call of something that had never known fear. Maya's grip tightened on the spear, her fingers trembling as the creature emerged from the shadows. It was massive, its body a grotesque blend of sinew and carapace. Its 6 legs, each as thick as tree trunks, moved with eerie precision, while its elongated torso rippled with muscle beneath a thick, chitinous exoskeleton. The creature's head was the most horrifying feature, a maw filled with jagged, overlapping teeth and 6 glowing yellow eyes that scanned the arena hungrily. The crowd erupted into a frenzy, their chants reaching a fever pitch. The Zralek lived for this, their eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. To them, it was theater, a spectacle of death. But to Maya and Nico, it was survival. "Maya, left flank," Nico said, his voice low but firm. He moved with purpose, his blade raised. She nodded, swallowing hard, and darted to the side. The arena's sand shifted beneath her feet, each step requiring balance she barely had. The creature's head snapped toward her movement, a wet snarl escaping its throat. Maya's pulse quickened. She was used to tight spaces, confined tunnels, and hard, metal floors. This open expanse, this exposure was alien to her. Nico lunged forward, his blade slicing into one of the creature's legs. It roared in response, rearing back, but the wound was shallow, too shallow. The beast's eyes flared, and with a sickening speed, one of its legs lashed out. Nico was flung backward, crashing into the arena's wall with a dull thud. He groaned, struggling to his feet. "Damn it," Maya muttered under her breath. Her instinct screamed for her to run, but there was nowhere to go. The gates were sealed, and the Zralek's eyes bore down on her like twin moons in the sky. The creature turned toward her now, its massive bulk shifting with a terrifying grace. She planted her feet, raising the spear, and tried to steady her breathing. Asterisk, stay calm. Think. Find its weakness. Asterisk. The beast charged, its legs pounding against the ground. Maya's body moved before her mind could catch up. She ducked under the first swing of its clawed limb and rolled to the side, the spear still clutched tightly in her hands. The crowd roared their approval, but she ignored them, focusing solely on the creature in front of her. It was fast, too fast for its size, but it wasn't invincible. The shallow cut Nico had made on its leg bled a thick, viscous liquid that oozed onto the sand. Its eyes were wide, unfocused, and its movements, though quick, were imprecise. Maya's mind raced as she cataloged every detail. "Maya, get clear!" Nico shouted. He had recovered enough to stand, though his blade arm hung at an odd angle. Despite the pain etched across his face, he moved back into the fray, circling the creature. The beast's attention flicked to him, and Maya seized the opportunity. She sprinted forward, the spear aimed at the joint of its nearest leg. With a grunt, she drove the weapon forward. The spear's tip pierced the chitin, sinking deep into the joint. The creature screamed, a high-pitched wail that grated against her ears. The crowd's roar grew louder, an unsettling mix of excitement and bloodlust. For them, this wasn't about who survived. It was about how much suffering could be wrung out of the moment. The beast staggered, its injured leg collapsing beneath it. Nico darted forward, his blade slashing at another joint. This time, the cut was deeper, and the creature's movements became more erratic. It thrashed wildly, its claws raking against the ground and sending plumes of sand into the air. Maya coughed, her vision blurred by the dust cloud. Her ears rang from the creature's screeches, but she forced herself to focus. She couldn't afford to lose momentum. Gripping the broken shaft of the spear, she approached the beast's side. Its chest heaved, the bioluminescent veins along its body pulsing rapidly. "Nico, aim for the chest," she shouted, her voice raw. He nodded, his steps cautious but determined. The creature's thrashing slowed, its movements sluggish. Whether it was exhaustion or blood loss, Maya couldn't tell, but she wasn't about to waste the opportunity. She climbed onto its back, the chitinous surface slick beneath her feet. Using the broken spear as leverage, she drove it into one of the pulsing veins, twisting it until she felt the resistance give way. The beast convulsed violently, throwing Maya off. She hit the sand hard, her vision swimming. Dazed, she barely registered the final blow, Nico plunging his blade deep into the creature's chest. It let out one final, piercing scream before collapsing into a lifeless heap. The arena fell silent for a brief moment, as if the crowd collectively held their breath. Then, the cheers erupted, deafening in their intensity. Maya struggled to her feet, her body aching but alive. She glanced at Nico, who gave her a weary smile, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "Not bad for prey," he said, his voice strained but teasing. Maya didn't respond. She looked up at the Zralek watching from above, their silver eyes unblinking. This wasn't over. The fight had only just begun. The aftermath of the fight brought no relief. As the creature's massive corpse lay cooling in the arena's sands, Maya's legs trembled beneath her. Exhaustion seeped into every fiber of her body, but there was no time to rest. The crowd's cheers began to fade, replaced by a low, expectant hum. It was an ominous signal, one that Maya felt deep in her bones. This wasn't the end. From the edges of the arena, subtle movements caught her attention. She turned, her vision still blurry from the dust and chaos. The gates, those massive, unyielding barriers of alien metal, were stirring again. Maya gritted her teeth. Round two, she muttered under her breath, a bitterness creeping into her voice. The Zralek weren't done with them. They never would be, not until the arena consumed every ounce of resistance in her. Nico's voice broke through her thoughts. "Do you hear that?" he asked, his tone sharp with unease. He was leaning heavily on his blade, his face pale and drawn. Maya stilled, straining to listen. The hum of the crowd dulled, and in its place came a low, rhythmic pounding. It wasn't the sound of footsteps, but something heavier, deliberate, like the heartbeat of the arena itself. She scanned the shadows at the edges of the dome, her grip tightening on what remained of her spear. "This isn't like before," Nico said, his voice barely above a whisper. He looked at her, his eyes dark with worry. "They're testing us?" The gates groaned as they slid open, revealing not one, but two figures emerging from the darkness. Maya's heart sank. These weren't mindless beasts. They were humanoid, their forms lithe and predatory. Their armor shimmered like liquid obsidian, reflecting the arena's eerie glow. Each carried a weapon, a serrated blade in one hand and a whip crackling with energy in the other. The crowd erupted into a frenzied cheer. These weren't just hunters. They were champions, seasoned killers brought in to escalate the spectacle. "They're toying with us," Maya said bitterly, her voice low but steady. She looked at Nico, who was still struggling to stand upright. His injuries were worse than he let on, but there was no room for weakness here. They both knew it. The two hunters moved with a grace that was almost hypnotic. One of them tilted its head, its silver eyes locking onto Maya. A cold dread washed over her. This wasn't just a fight. It was a game, and she and Nico were pawns. "We can't split up," Nico said, stepping closer to her. His breathing was labored, but his resolve hadn't faltered. "If they separate us, we're done." Maya nodded. "Stay close. Watch their movements. They're faster than us, but they're not invincible." The first hunter struck without warning. Its whip lashed out, a streak of crackling energy that split the air between them. Maya barely managed to dodge, the whip grazing her arm and leaving a searing burn in its wake. She bit back a cry of pain, focusing instead on the hunter's movements. It was testing her, gauging her reactions. Nico lunged at the second hunter, his blade flashing in the dim light. The alien parried effortlessly, its movements almost lazy. But as Nico pressed his attack, his strikes grew faster, more erratic. The hunter deflected each one, its silver eyes gleaming with amusement. "They're playing with us," Maya said through gritted teeth. She feinted toward the first hunter, drawing its attention, then darted back to give herself space. Her mind raced, analyzing every detail. The hunters were faster, stronger, and better armed. But they were also overconfident. That arrogance could be their downfall. "Nico," she called, her voice sharp. "Lead it toward me." He hesitated for a split second before understanding her plan. With a shout, he drove forward, forcing the second hunter back toward Maya. The first hunter, distracted by her movement, didn't see the shift in their positioning. Maya lunged, her broken spear aimed at its exposed side. The weapon struck true, piercing the gap between its armor plates. The hunter let out a guttural snarl, its body convulsing as it tried to wrench itself free. "Now!" Maya shouted. Nico didn't need to be told twice. He swung his blade in a wide arc, the edge biting into the first hunter's neck. Black ichor sprayed from the wound as the alien collapsed, its whip falling limp in the sand. The second hunter froze, its head snapping toward its fallen comrade. For the first time, Maya saw hesitation in its movements. It stepped back, its silver eyes narrowing. The crowd's cheers turned to jeers, their bloodlust unsatisfied. Maya and Nico advanced together, their breaths ragged but determined. The second hunter's whip crackled as it raised the weapon, but the confidence it had exuded earlier was gone. Maya could feel the shift in the air. They had turned the game on its masters. The hunter backed toward the gate it had emerged from, its posture defensive. The crowd's jeers grew louder, the arena's pulse quickening. Maya knew they wouldn't allow the fight to end this way. The Zralek wanted carnage, not retreat. "We don't let it escape," Maya said, her voice steely. Nico nodded, his blade steady in his hand despite the tremor in his arm. Together, they closed the distance, ready to finish what the Zralek had started. The second hunter's retreat was short-lived. The moment its back touched the cold, unyielding metal of the arena's gate, it froze, as if realizing there was no escape. Above, the Zralek crowd roared their disapproval. The sounds reverberated through the arena, a cacophony of disdain and bloodlust that demanded more than a mere survival. They wanted dominance, destruction, and spectacle. Maya's breath came in short, sharp gasps, her muscles screaming in protest. But the moment of hesitation in their adversary gave her clarity. The hunter's whip coiled loosely in its hand, the crackling energy flickering weakly, betraying its user's uncertainty. "It's cornered," Maya said under her breath, gripping the broken spear tighter. The jagged edge glistened with alien ichor, and she shifted her weight, prepared for the inevitable next strike. Nico, his movements sluggish but deliberate, circled to her left. Blood stained the torn fabric of his sleeve, and his blade trembled slightly in his grasp. Yet his eyes, sharp and unyielding, remained fixed on the hunter. "Cornered doesn't mean it won't fight," he muttered, low enough for only Maya to hear. The hunter snarled, a guttural sound that echoed through the arena. It raised its whip, the weapon snapping to life in a blaze of blue energy. But there was something different now, a frantic edge to its movements, a desperation that Maya recognized. She felt it herself too many times to count. "Stay with me," she said to Nico, her voice barely above a whisper. They moved as one, their steps careful and measured, closing the distance with the methodical precision of predators stalking their prey. The crowd above grew restless. Metallic clanging and guttural cheers reverberated from their stance. Their disdain for the hunter's retreat was palpable, and Maya could feel their anger pressing down on her like a weight. For a brief moment, she almost pitied the creature. Almost. The hunter lashed out suddenly, its whip slicing through the air with a crack that reverberated in Maya's skull. She ducked instinctively, the energy searing past her shoulder. Nico darted forward, his blade aimed at the creature's exposed flank, but the hunter was quicker. It twisted its body, the whip curling back to strike. "Nico, pull back!" Maya shouted. He threw himself to the side, the whip's crackling tip narrowly missing his chest. Sand sprayed into the air as he hit the ground, rolling to absorb the impact. The hunter's focus shifted back to Maya, its silver eyes narrowing. "Good," she thought. "Stay on me." Maya feinted to her right, drawing the hunter's attention. It followed, its movements almost imperceptibly slower now. The ichor seeping from its wounded companion still stained the arena floor, and the sight fueled a dark determination within her. She pivoted sharply, driving the broken spear upward toward the hunter's arm. The jagged tip scraped against its armor, sending up a burst of sparks. The weapon didn't penetrate, but it was enough to throw the hunter off balance. Nico was on his feet in an instant. He lunged forward, his blade striking true this time. The edge bit into the hunter's thigh, eliciting a strangled snarl. The alien staggered, its whip faltering as it lashed out wildly. Maya saw her opening and didn't hesitate. She drove the spear into the soft joint at the base of its torso, twisting it with all her strength. The hunter let out a deafening roar, its body convulsing as it crumpled to its knees. Maya pulled back, her hands slick with sweat and blood. The creature's silver eyes dimmed, its movements growing sluggish. Nico approached cautiously, his blade raised. He glanced at Maya, waiting for her signal. She nodded. "Finish it." Nico didn't hesitate. With a swift, precise motion, he drove his blade into the hunter's neck. The alien's body jerked once, then collapsed lifeless onto the blood-stained sand. For a moment, the arena was silent. Then the crowd erupted into chaos. The Zralek's cheers and jeers merged into an incomprehensible roar, their metallic voices vibrating through the very walls of the arena. Maya's chest heaved as she looked down at the fallen hunter. The adrenaline that had carried her through the fight was fading, leaving a hollow ache in its place. Nico dropped to one knee beside her, his hand pressed to his injured arm. "We're alive," he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "For now." Maya looked up at the Zralek, their gleaming eyes reflecting the light of the arena. They weren't satisfied. She could see it in the way their claws drummed against the railings, the way their metallic mouths twisted in grotesque anticipation. "They're not done with us," Maya said, her voice steady despite the weariness threatening to drag her down. She gripped the broken spear tighter, her knuckles white. From above, a deep, resonant tone echoed through the arena. The gates began to rumble once more, their massive frames sliding open to reveal the shadows beyond. Maya's heart sank. Whatever came next would be worse. She knew it, and so did Nico. "Get ready," she said, her voice firm despite the exhaustion in her body. "This isn't over." The arena floor shifted beneath their feet. What had been a solid expanse of sand and blood moments ago now quivered with mechanical intent. Maya steadied herself, gripping the jagged spear tightly, her eyes flicking toward Nico. He noticed it too, the subtle tremor, the distant hum of something massive awakening below them. "What now?" Nico's voice was raw, stripped of the sharp defiance that usually anchored him. Blood trailed down his arm, dripping steadily onto the ground. The wound on his side was hastily bound but still oozing. Maya didn't answer immediately. She was too focused on the shifting sands, on the slow, deliberate descent of the arena's towering gates into the earth. The crowd, once a cacophony of snarls and metallic chants, fell unervingly silent. Thousands of gleaming eyes bore down on them from above, unblinking and predatory. The Zralek were waiting for something that even they found worth holding their breath for. The floor groaned. It wasn't the sound of collapsing rock, but something alive, deliberate. Maya felt it in her bones before she saw it, the faint glow emanating from beneath the sands. It pulsed rhythmically, like the heartbeat of a monstrous beast. "This isn't a fight," Maya muttered, her voice low, but edged with steel. It's a trap. Before Nico could respond, the ground erupted. A pillar of light shot into the sky, scattering sand and debris like a volcanic blast. Maya shielded her face as the force knocked her back, her ears ringing from the sheer intensity. When the light dimmed, a shape began to emerge from the epicenter of the explosion. It was massive, a towering construct of bone and metal, its limbs angular and insect-like, its head crowned with a grotesque array of spines. Its body radiated heat, the air around it shimmering with waves of distortion. But what struck Maya most were its eyes, 6 glowing orbs embedded in its skull, each one a different shade of sickly green. They moved independently, scanning the arena with a cold, calculating intelligence. Nico coughed, spitting out sand as he struggled to his feet. "What the hell is that?" Maya didn't answer. Her focus was locked on the creature as it unfolded itself fully, its elongated limbs carving deep gouges into the ground. This wasn't just another opponent. This was something designed to end them, a final test of their resolve. The crowd erupted once more, their anticipation boiling over into frenzied roars. The arena's lights dimmed, casting the creature in an ominous glow. Maya felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but she refused to let it crush her. She glanced at Nico, who was gripping his blade with white-knuckled determination. "We've got one chance," Maya said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "We take it down fast before it has time to adapt." Nico nodded, his expression grim. "Got a plan?" She took a step forward, her gaze never leaving the creature. "We make one." The construct's eyes locked onto them, its movements accelerating with a fluidity that belied its size. It lunged, its massive forelimbs slamming into the ground where Maya had stood moments before. She rolled to the side, the impact sending a shockwave through the arena. Sand sprayed into the air, obscuring her vision, but she didn't stop moving. Nico charged from the opposite side, his blade slicing toward one of the creature's limbs. The metal edge scraped against its armored exoskeleton, leaving only a shallow mark. The creature swiveled its head toward him, one of its eyes glowing brighter. A beam of searing green energy shot out, narrowly missing Nico as he dove to the ground. "Its eyes!" Maya shouted, darting forward to draw its attention. "They're vulnerable." The creature turned toward her, its limbs clicking with mechanical precision. Maya's mind raced as she scanned its movements, searching for patterns, weaknesses. Her broken spear felt inadequate against something so vast, so otherworldly, but it was all she had. "Keep it distracted," she called to Nico, who was already circling behind the creature. He nodded, his movements sharp and deliberate despite his injuries. The construct lashed out again, its spined limbs slicing through the air with deadly speed. Maya ducked under one strike, then leapt over another, the jagged edges narrowly missing her. She could feel the heat radiating off its body, the oppressive weight of its presence pressing against her. Nico let out a roar as he drove his blade into one of the creature's legs, the impact sending a shudder through its frame. It staggered, its balance momentarily thrown off. Maya seized the opportunity, lunging toward its face. She drove the spear upward, aiming for one of its glowing eyes. The jagged edge pierced the soft tissue, and the creature let out a deafening screech, its body convulsing violently. "Got it!" Maya shouted, but her victory was short-lived. The creature thrashed, one of its limbs catching her across the side and sending her sprawling. Pain erupted through her ribs as she hit the ground, the air knocked from her lungs. Maya! Nico's voice cut through the haze of pain. She forced herself to her feet, clutching her side. The construct was wounded, but it wasn't done. Its remaining eyes glowed brighter, its movements becoming more erratic and aggressive. "We're not finished yet," Maya said through gritted teeth. She tightened her grip on the broken spear, her determination burning brighter than ever. The crowd's roars faded into the background as she locked eyes with the monstrous construct. It was time to end this. The creature's thrashing movements tore through the arena, each swing of its spined limbs carving deep scars into the ground. Maya pushed herself to her feet, her broken spear feeling even more insignificant in the face of the towering beast. Her ribs screamed with every breath, but she forced herself to move, to think, to act. Above, the crowd's cries intensified, an electric surge of approval and anticipation. The Zralek's metallic voices reverberated through the arena, an alien chorus that seemed to fuel the beast's rage. Maya clenched her jaw. If she was going to survive, she couldn't let them, or it, see her falter. "Nico," she called out, scanning the chaotic battlefield. He emerged from behind a jagged column of debris, his blade still in hand, his face pale but determined. "I'm here," he shouted, weaving through the wreckage to avoid the creature's erratic attacks. Its remaining 5 eyes burned like malevolent stars, each one darting in a different direction, scanning, calculating. Maya darted toward him, her steps unsteady but purposeful. "We need to take out another eye. It's getting faster, smarter." Nico nodded grimly. "I'll keep it distracted. You go for the next one." She wanted to argue, to remind him that he was barely holding himself together, but there wasn't time. The creature let out a guttural screech, its limbs coiling like springs before launching it forward. Maya and Nico dove in opposite directions as the beast's massive body crashed down between them, sending sand and debris flying into the air. Maya rolled to her feet, the impact jarring every nerve in her body. She glanced at Nico, who was already on the move, circling the creature with deliberate steps. His blade flashed in the dim light as he struck at its legs, drawing its attention. The creature's head snapped toward him, one of its eyes locking onto his movements. "Come on, you bastard," Nico growled, his voice laced with defiance. He feinted left, then right, staying just out of reach as the beast's limbs swung wildly. Maya took her chance. She sprinted toward the creature's flank, her spear poised for the strike. The world around her blurred, the roar of the crowd fading into a distant hum. All that mattered was the glowing orb ahead of her, the vulnerable eye that swiveled too slowly to notice her approach. With a guttural cry, Maya drove the jagged spear forward. The weapon pierced the eye's soft tissue, sinking deep into the creature's skull. The beast let out an ear-splitting wail, its body convulsing violently. Maya barely had time to let go of the spear before she was thrown backward by the force of its thrashing. She hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the air from her lungs. Dazed, she struggled to push herself up, her vision swimming. The creature's screeching was deafening, its movements erratic and frenzied. Maya could see Nico dodging its attacks, his blade flashing as he aimed for its legs and joints, trying to cripple it further. "Stay with me, Maya," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. She forced herself to her feet, every muscle protesting. Blood trickled down her temple, mingling with the sweat and sand that clung to her skin. She reached for another weapon, a shard of metal that had been torn from the arena floor. It wasn't much, but it was sharp and solid, and right now that was enough. The creature stumbled, its balance thrown off by the loss of another eye. Its movements were still fast, but less precise, its coordination faltering. Maya tightened her grip on the makeshift blade and began circling to its other side, mirroring Nico's movements. "It's blind on the left," Nico called out, his voice strained. "Use it." Maya nodded, her mind racing. She needed to end this. The beast was vulnerable, but it was still deadly, and every second they spent fighting it brought them closer to exhaustion or death. She moved swiftly, using the creature's own chaotic movements to mask her approach. Its limbs lashed out wildly, but its strikes were slower now, less deliberate. Maya slipped past its defenses, her heart pounding in her chest. She raised the shard of metal and aimed for its side, where the armor plating was thinner. The blade struck true, piercing through the creature's exoskeleton. The beast let out another wail, its body convulsing violently. Maya held on tightly, driving the blade deeper, twisting it with all her strength. The creature's thrashing grew weaker, its movements more sluggish. "Maya, watch out!" Nico's warning came too late. One of the creature's limbs swung toward her, catching her across the side. She was thrown to the ground, pain exploding through her body. She struggled to breathe, her vision dimming. But then she saw it. The creature was faltering, its massive body swaying unsteadily. Nico seized the moment, driving his blade into one of its joints. The beast let out a final, anguished cry before collapsing, its massive frame crashing to the ground with a thunderous impact. The arena fell silent. The crowd's roars had ceased, replaced by a tense, almost reverent hush. Maya lay on the ground, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. She turned her head to see Nico standing over the fallen creature, his blade still embedded in its lifeless body. "We did it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He looked at Maya, a faint smile breaking through his exhaustion. "We're still here." Maya managed a weak nod, the weight of their victory sinking in. But even as she lay there, battered and bloodied, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The Zralek weren't done with them yet. Not by a long shot. The silence was short-lived. As Maya and Nico stood over the fallen beast, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. At first, it was a faint vibration, barely noticeable through their adrenaline-laden bodies. But then it grew stronger, a rhythmic thrum that seemed to echo from the depths below. "What now?" Nico asked, his voice sharp with dread. His blade was still clenched in his hand, its edge coated in the thick, black ichor of the creature they had just slain. Maya didn't answer. Her gaze was fixed on the arena floor, on the faint cracks that were spidering out from beneath the beast's massive carcass. The air felt charged, heavy with an energy that pressed against her skin like an invisible force. Above them, the Zralek crowd remained eerily silent. Thousands of alien eyes bore down on them, unblinking and inscrutable. It wasn't the kind of silence that followed disappointment or awe. It was something else, something unnerving, as though they were waiting. "Move back," Maya ordered, her voice steady despite the chaos brewing around them. She grabbed Nico by the arm and pulled him away from the beast's body. He didn't resist, though his gaze lingered on the cracks spreading across the ground. The trembling stopped abruptly. For a moment, everything was still. Then, with a deafening roar, the arena floor erupted. Shards of stone and metal shot into the air, forcing Maya and Nico to shield their faces. A plume of thick, black smoke billowed upward, and from the chasm emerged something that froze Maya's blood. It was a structure, or perhaps a machine, towering and ancient. Its surface was etched with glowing runes that pulsed with an otherworldly light. It resembled an obelisk, but its edges were jagged and irregular, as though it had been violently torn from the ground below. At its apex, a sphere of pulsating energy hovered, its surface swirling with colors Maya couldn't name. "That doesn't look like part of the game," Nico muttered, his voice barely audible. Maya nodded, her mouth dry. Whatever this was, it wasn't meant to be a spectacle for the crowd. This was something different, something deeper. The Zralek silence now made sense. They weren't watching for entertainment. They were observing an experiment. "It's waking up," Maya said, her voice trembling despite herself. The obelisk's runes glowed brighter, their pulsations growing faster. The sphere at its apex expanded slightly, tendrils of energy licking at the air around it. "We need to get out of here," Nico said, taking a step back. "Now." But there was nowhere to go. The arena's walls, impossibly high and reinforced, loomed over them like a prison. The gates remained sealed, their mechanisms silent and unyielding. Maya's mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening, what they could do. But the obelisk's presence was overwhelming, its energy pulling at her thoughts like a tide. And then it spoke. The voice wasn't a sound so much as a sensation, a vibration that resonated within Maya's mind. It was deep and hollow, like the echo of a distant storm. Subject compatibility confirmed. Testing phase initiated. Maya's knees buckled, her vision swimming. She could feel the weight of the words pressing against her consciousness, probing, searching. She clutched her head, trying to block it out, but it was useless. Nico's scream snapped her out of it. She looked up to see him writhing on the ground, his hands clawing at his temples. The obelisk's energy had intensified, the tendrils of light reaching out like searching fingers. One of them touched Nico, and his body convulsed violently. "Nico!" Maya shouted, forcing herself to her feet. She stumbled toward him, her legs unsteady, her mind still reeling from the obelisk's presence. She grabbed his shoulders and shook him, trying to break whatever hold it had on him. "Stay with me? Focus on me?" His eyes snapped open, wild and unfocused. But he nodded, his breaths coming in ragged gasps. Maya helped him to his feet, though he leaned heavily against her, his strength sapped. Survival parameters inadequate. Augmentation required. The voice came again, and this time Maya felt a sharp pain in her chest, as though something was being torn from within her. She gasped, clutching her chest, and looked up at the obelisk. Its energy was shifting, coalescing into a single point. A beam of light shot out, striking the ground in front of them. When the light faded, something was left behind. It was a weapon, or at least it looked like one. A sleek, metallic staff, its surface engraved with the same glowing runes as the obelisk. The energy within it hummed softly, a steady, beckoning rhythm. Maya stared at it, her mind racing. She didn't trust it. Whatever the obelisk was, it wasn't on their side. But the gates were still sealed, and the walls were still impossibly high. If they were going to survive, they needed every advantage they could get. "Maya," Nico said weakly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Don't." She glanced at him, then back at the staff. Her hand trembled as she reached out, her fingers brushing against its surface. The moment she made contact, a surge of energy shot through her, flooding her body with heat and light. She cried out, dropping to her knees as the staff's power coursed through her. Images flashed in her mind, fractured visions of alien landscapes, battles fought in the depths of space, and creatures unlike anything she had ever seen. The obelisk's voice echoed through it all, cold and calculating. Predator Protocol activated. When the visions cleared, Maya was left gasping, her body trembling with the aftershocks of the energy. She looked down at the staff in her hand, its runes now glowing in sync with her heartbeat. The weight of it felt natural, as though it had been made for her. Nico stared at her, his expression a mix of fear and awe. "What did it do to you?" Maya didn't answer. She couldn't. All she knew was that something had changed. And whatever was coming next, she wasn't the same person who had entered this arena. Maya rose slowly, the glowing staff in her grip pulsating in sync with her heartbeat. The obelisk loomed before her, its tendrils of light recoiling slightly as if it recognized her transformation. The crowd above erupted into frenzied screams, not of entertainment, but fear. For the first time, the Zralek's smug sense of control faltered. "What now?" Nico's voice was hoarse, his body trembling as he leaned against a jagged fragment of the arena floor. His fear was palpable, but so was his trust. He had seen Maya rise to every impossible challenge, and now she was something more, a force the arena's masters could no longer predict. The obelisk's voice resonated in their minds once again, colder and more menacing than before. Primary phase complete. Termination protocol active. The ground quaked violently, and from the chasm surrounding the obelisk emerged new horrors. Metallic constructs, spider-like and bristling with energy weapons, clambered onto the arena floor. Their movements were unnervingly precise, their glowing red eyes locked onto Maya. She tightened her grip on the staff, its energy humming louder as if responding to her determination. "Nico, find cover. This ends now." He hesitated but obeyed, retreating to the shadows of a crumbled wall. Maya stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the obelisk. The constructs advanced, their legs clicking against the stone as they encircled her. The crowd above grew silent again, their collective anticipation suffocating. The first construct lunged, its bladed appendages slicing through the air with deadly precision. Maya moved instinctively, the staff spinning in her hands as she deflected the attack. The runes along its surface flared, releasing a burst of energy that sent the construct flying backward in a shower of sparks. Two more charged, their weapons firing bolts of searing light. Maya ducked and rolled, the staff's energy forming a shield around her that absorbed the blasts. She struck out, the weapon's power lashing out like a living thing, disintegrating one construct and crippling another. But they kept coming. For every construct she destroyed, two more seemed to take its place. The obelisk's energy grew darker, its tendrils thrashing wildly as if feeding off the chaos. Maya's movements became more desperate, her breaths ragged. The power within her was immense, but it wasn't endless. And then she heard it, Nico's voice, faint but clear. "Maya, the sphere." She followed his gaze to the apex of the obelisk, where the pulsating sphere of energy hovered. Its light was unstable, flickering erratically. It was the source. Destroying it might end this nightmare once and for all. The constructs seemed to sense her intent. They swarmed, their attacks coming faster, more coordinated. Maya fought with everything she had, her movements a blur of precision and fury. The staff was an extension of her will, striking with the force of a storm. But the path to the obelisk was still blocked. "You can do this." Nico's voice came again, stronger this time. "I'll cover you." Before she could protest, he emerged from his hiding place, wielding a broken shard of metal like a blade. He charged at the constructs, drawing their attention. Maya's heart clenched, but she knew this was their only chance. With a burst of speed, she surged toward the obelisk. The staff's energy flared brighter than ever, forming a protective barrier around her as she leapt onto the obelisk's jagged surface. The runes beneath her feet glowed angrily, resisting her ascent, but she climbed relentlessly. The sphere's energy was overwhelming, its heat searing her skin as she approached. The staff in her hand vibrated violently, as though it too recognized the enormity of the moment. She raised it high, aiming for the heart of the sphere. "For humanity," she whispered, and drove the staff downward with all her strength. The impact was immediate. The sphere shattered, releasing a blinding explosion of light and sound. The obelisk's runes dimmed, its tendrils of energy disintegrating. The constructs collapsed, their bodies falling lifelessly to the ground. The arena itself trembled as if in pain, cracks spreading across its walls. Maya was thrown backward by the force of the explosion, landing hard on the arena floor. Pain radiated through her body, but she forced herself to move to see if it had worked. The obelisk was crumbling, its once imposing form reduced to rubble. The energy that had suffused the arena was gone, leaving only an eerie stillness. Above, the Zralek were in chaos, their once composed demeanor shattered. They screamed and shouted, their voices a cacophony of fear and anger. Nico stumbled toward her, bloodied but alive. "Maya," he said, his voice shaking. "You did it." She nodded, her gaze drifting to the ruined obelisk. "It's over," she said, though the words felt hollow. The Zralek had put them through hell, and while they had survived, the scars, both physical and mental, would remain. The arena's gates groaned open, and beyond them, a vast, unfamiliar landscape stretched out under an alien sky. Freedom. But what kind of world awaited them? Maya didn't know, but she would face it the same way she had faced everything else, with grit, determination, and the knowledge that humanity could not be broken. As she and Nico stepped through the gates, leaving the arena behind, Maya cast one last glance at the Zralek. They stared down at her, their expressions a mix of hatred and something else, fear. Good, she thought. Let them fear her. Let them fear humanity. Because they had proven one thing. Even in the darkest moments, even against impossible odds, humans would rise.